how are you? Happy February. I wanted to give you a little update about the past 2 months, January and February. And if you're new here, my name is Anna Stride. I'm a writer of middle grade fiction, and I'm currently working on getting my first manuscript ready to be submitted to agents. I have a conference coming up next month where I will be pitching my book to an agent. And so even though there is a possibility that it will not be like 100% ready, by then I will try to get it to 100% ready as much as I can, because of course I want to have a polished manuscript in case that agent is interested. This stage of working on the manuscript is brand new for me, and this is the first time when I actually sent my book for somebody to read. My 4 alpha readers. I don't call them beta readers because they are writers. They are not just regular readers. And so I am looking for feedback from them, which is both on the reader's side and on the writer's side. And I trust their knowledge of storytelling and prose and all sorts of things like that. And so I call them alpha readers. They're my first group that I send the book to, and I'm beginning to get some feedback back. And so I am excited to talk about that. It's also the Olympics season. I don't know if you guys are watching, but I'm definitely watching the Olympics. Honestly, it was such a tradition when I was growing up in our house. Whenever the Olympics were on, our TV was on 24/7 basically. I remember watching it during daytime, at night, like maybe sometimes even waking up like at 4 a.m. or something to watch a rerun that I missed. It was always a big thing. Like our family was big on like competitive kind of shows like Eurovision or the Olympics. And you know, now that I'm in America, I also watch Super Bowl every year. I do not watch football otherwise, like any other time of the year, but I do watch Super Bowl, and I do love the halftime shows. And this year the halftime show was Chef's Kiss. This February is very exciting for me because, you know, such an event as the Olympics, it only happens, like this particular, the winter type, only happens every 4 years. So my focus is a little bit all over the place because of course I wanted to have the book ready, but I also, like, a part of me is like, oh, it's the Olympics season, I want to watch Olympics, you know. So, but at the same time, I managed to, when I needed to like focus and really get it ready and send it out, I did it. So I'm happy about that. I also went ice skating yesterday, inspired, you know, by watching them, but of course, like, my ice skating is very amateur and I've never done it as a hobby. I only learned to do it on my own when in winter we would go on an ice rink, and it was just for fun. But yesterday, my son and I, we went to an ice rink, and I got a little carried away, and I thought I could do something that I really can't. And I ended up falling on my butt. And I have to tell you, falling forward is so much better than falling backward. This was the only fall I did yesterday. I only fell backwards. And I guess when you're falling backward, you don't want to, you know, break your head on the ice. And so you're trying to kind of like stay up a little bit, right? And it's like this kind of cartoonish moment when you're losing your balance and you're kind of like your feet are going like this because you're trying to stay upright, and then you can't and you fall back, and you're trying to kind of keep your head a little bit up so it doesn't hit the ice. And so the main impact was on my butt, like on the left side, and now it's hurting so much to even sit. Like the whole left part of my body is hurting, and I can definitely feel the muscles because, like, as I was trying to stop, you know, to break the fall and like to stop myself from falling, I definitely like hurt myself, and I'm like, oof, okay. And this actually gives me a new perspective on, like, oh my god, like, these people, they fall I don't know, thousands of times probably throughout their career as children learning to skate, and then later in competitions. And ice is hard and ice is slippery, and it's crazy that they just get up and continue skating their program because it really hurts. And I mean, I'm sure it's at some point like they get used to it to a degree, but I mean, pain is pain, right? It still hurts and they still overcome so many difficulties. It's legit crazy. There was one woman, she's 42. She was participating, I think, in the pairs. Yes, in the pairs. And so she skated and she fell a couple of times, and when she was getting off the ice, she was like, I think I broke my nose, you know? And I read interviews with them afterwards with some figure skaters, and all of them are saying like, yes, like I had so many injuries, I had so many surgeries, like I can barely walk. Sometimes, you know, I can sit for a long time. Like the sacrifices for the sport are absolutely insane, and it's so inspirational, even though, you know, writing is a very different kind of endeavor than, you know, sports. Just this level of commitment. And of course, like, I'm not saying I'm trying to work like an Olympian on my writing, like 8 hours a day, like really going in all the way. But I think if you do approach that level of commitment, my gosh, you can really go places, you know. It's just, I love to see people try and succeed and overcome obstacles. Oh, it's just the best. And so I feel very inspired, even though it has really nothing to do with writing. So this was just a long tangent that I wanted to tell you how much I love the Olympics and sports in general, and like how that inspires me so much to apply myself more seriously to the craft. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the feedback and what kind of feedback I've asked for and how I'm organizing the process now that I'm getting some of it back. I sent them the full manuscript. I did tell them ideally I would love to hear from them somewhere in the beginning of March or by the middle of March, so I at least can make some edits before going to that conference. But at the same time, I told them, like, if you can do it any sooner, that's great. And a couple of people already provided feedback to at least the first chapter, which is wonderful. And so now I will be working on compiling their feedback and like seeing where maybe they both see the same issues that can be worked on. And one of them sent the file back with just their comments, and so I will be able to see their comments as they appear basically in real time whenever they have time to work on my book. They go in and they add comments, and so I can check from time to time to see like have they moved past what I've already seen. Another person is sending me voice memos, which is amazing, and I love, you know, it's my friend too. So I just love listening to their voice in general, but I particularly love, I guess, this way of feedback given, because you're not going to be talking in a voice memo for like an hour, right? Well, I guess it depends on who you are. I would be talking for an hour, but that person is not going to be talking for an hour. And so their feedback is really very concise, but also very actionable, I found it. So I have these two little notes here. Let me get them. So basically, as I was listening to their voice memo, I took these two pieces of paper and I wrote like positive and negative on each of them. And of course, it's not like really negative, but it means like these are the things I will need to work on, and these are the things that they liked that I need to keep in mind, because that's what's working, right? So I don't have to do anything about this one. It's just for me to know, okay, this worked, and to see what works for different readers. But this one is the actionable items, and I only have like maybe 4 actionable items here, but they are, one of them is kind of like overarching, so I can already start working on that. It's gonna be also interesting because 2 of my writer friends who are giving feedback, they are native speakers. I'm not a native speaker, right? So I do appreciate their feedback in terms of language as well as storytelling. And the other 2 writers are Russian speaking like me. They can read and understand the English to a degree, right? They'll be able to read the manuscript and understand. But I guess because they're not native speakers and I don't know what their ability in writing in English is, I'm mostly interested in like storytelling kind of feedback from them, because both of them studied storytelling as part of their education, and I know they're very good in stories and like just in producing media and stuff. So I'm very interested in what they will have to say about the story aspect, about the plot, about the characters, and what works and what doesn't. You know how a lot of people say, I've always wanted to be a writer and I wrote stories ever since I was like 5 years old, etc. That's not me. Like, I loved reading and I loved languages and writing and reading in school. But I never really tried to write a story until I was older. I tried to write some poems in school, I remember. But I think I started writing older. I can't even tell you like what my first story was or like attempt at creating something. But what I did always like to do, I love to read craft books. So I was always curious in the mechanics of the story and how things work, and like just this underlying, you know, structure and all sorts of things like that. And I know some writers just hate it. They're like, oh my gosh, this is so standard. Like, why would you follow something so literally, etc. But I never did. Like, when I wrote this story, I didn't sit down and looked at it like, okay, so this is my first act and this is my second act and this is my third act. Like, I mean, I knew there was a beginning, the middle, and the end, but I didn't really go like bit by bit, like, okay, and now let's save the kitten, and okay, and now let's do this and this. But I do love like this, I think, like studying writing in a more like academic way. So we have a short story contest at the library, and so at some point, I guess people who are in charge of promoting materials in the catalog, they made a little carousel with all the different books about writing. And of course, I looked through the books, and some of them I've read and some of them I haven't. But I guess I've seen this one and I ordered it, and it's a chunky one. And I started reading it recently. I'm kind of like skimming through it. I'm not like really reading like every single line, but it talks a lot about, you know, the hero with thousand faces, but this author, Christopher Wagler, he's having his own kind of look at this structure, like the mythical structure of the story. But what really made me happy is that I'm reading this and it talks about like different character prototypes, for example. And I'm like, oh, I have this, and I have this, and I have this one, and I have this one. Okay, and like, and these are like the little steps of the story that happen. And like, this happens and this happens. I'm like, yeah, like my story really follows that, even though I did not sit down and be like, let me just do it according to this system. I did not go in with a task like that, but I guess that just speaks to the universality of the story. How, especially if you read a lot, like it's just in your brain, like naturally in many ways. And so as you tell the story, you kind of follow it without even knowing that you're doing it. I'll be curious to hear what those two people who are very familiar with this kind of literature and with this kind of like systems, if they're gonna see it. I'm curious to see if they will find it original enough, even though it follows the structure pretty closely and it has all of those character archetypes. Today, I'll start working on compiling the feedback that I already got so that I can kind of start working on rewriting the first chapter. Since I don't have that much time till the conference, I really want to get a head start on that. And then as I'm getting more feedback, maybe I can look at the rest of the story and see what else I need to tinker with. But the first chapter is pretty critical, right? And so if there are issues there, I'd like to fix them right away. And it doesn't mean this is the last time I'm fixing them, but there are definitely some things to fix. So I want to get started on that. So I've got this very simple pad and I'm gonna write different bullet points. I know that I will not agree probably with all of the feedback. So I will not write every single point people are saying. What I will write down are things that I either already agree with or I want to consider more. So I'm gonna write it down and I'm gonna highlight things that I absolutely agree and accept and will be changing. I'm gonna highlight them in green. And I'm gonna highlight the things that I want to consider more and think about and decide if I'm gonna do what they're suggesting or if I'm gonna do something different but based on their suggestion, or if I'm gonna keep it as it is. So that will be in orange. And so this will give me a good idea of how much work I need to get done. to say, I've looked through the feedback. So one of my writers provided much more detailed feedback, so it's more like line edits, which is lovely. But I do not write them here because I want to focus here more of a like overarching things that both of them noticed or that kind of makes sense. And then with line edits, I don't even know how many of them I will need since I will be massively rewriting this chapter, I feel like. So some of the things, it's really interesting that both of them noticed. Like, for example, there was a scene and both of them were a little confused by what was going on in the scene and wanted more context or for me to clarify it better, which is just so great to see, to hear, because that's your first readers, right? So if it's confusing for them, it's going to be even more confusing for somebody who is not into writing, is just reading the book. So that's good to know because the scenes will stay. So whatever is happening in the first chapter is going to happen in the first chapter. But the question is, how do I rewrite it to make it more engaging and really to make everything work? I feel like, so what's interesting also is that one of the writers who is giving feedback now, they read the story, like the first chapter before. So they read the first two chapters before. So they have this background information about the way the story used to be. And they actually like the first version better, which is a little disheartening because I feel like this version is improved. And what's really interesting to me is that the previous version, as they felt, put us straight into the middle of the action. So it was much more like urgent, and they said it had a cinematic quality to it. And now this version, they feel like it's a little more bookish and a little more slow and creates some pacing issues later in the chapter. So it's very interesting because, you know, obviously as you write the following drafts, you feel like you are improving things, right? So I don't know. So this is the kind of feedback I will have to consider. And since it's going to be a pretty major rewrite, it's possible I will accept it, or I will accept it to some degree and rewrite maybe in a way that's different from the first version and from the second version, but does take into account that we don't want to start slow and that we want it to be somewhat cinematic. There are just so many things to juggle because there's the setting I need to introduce, and people who are not familiar with this kind of setting, I need to make sure they understand what kind of a setting it is. There is my character I need to introduce, the character goals, and they, you know, one person said the goals were clear, the characters like angst and like the motivations and everything was very clear, and then another person felt like by introducing all of this like background information and tidbits, it slowed, like I slowed the pacing. And the previous version was stronger because the pacing was faster because there are some active scenes that are happening in the first chapter. So a lot to think about, and I probably won't start rewriting today. I just need to think, what can I do? Because this background information is important for motivation. And it has to be clear by the end of this chapter, which they both loved. But the motivation has to be clear by the end of this chapter because that's what makes the character, you know, make certain decisions. And so, who said it? One of the writing YouTube channels I watch, they like to say that the stakes that a character can walk away from are the stakes the reader will walk away from. And because I'm introducing this background information, we know the stakes are high for this character and their decision makes sense. So I still need to somehow introduce that, but do it more subtly and without distracting that much from the action. So that's not an easy task, and it will require some thinking. But I definitely, you know, you need your first character. I mean, you need your first chapter to be absolutely perfect. Like that's what is gonna seal your fate, basically, whether it's with an agent, with an editor, or with the reader in the bookstore, the library. Like it has to work. because a lot of people choose if they want to read the book by reading the opening scene or maybe like a couple of pages. And so, of course, I want it to be perfect, and I know it's not perfect yet. So there'll be work to do. The problem is that you don't want to, like, those people who are reading, you will ask them to read once, and then you'll edit based on their feedback, but you will not ask them to read again because it's too much, A, and people don't have time, and also B, the more like for me as a writer, that's why it's important they're given this feedback, because I've read this stuff so many times. I've recorded myself reading it, I've listened to it a million times, I read through it a million times, so it's all kind of mush in my head at this point. And because I'm so close to it and I know exactly what the motivations are and what happens and this and that, and when I read the chapter out loud, I even read it with feeling, right? And so to me, it comes across like it's working because I'm able to make it work with my voice. But to an outside person, it might not be working. And so I will not be able to give them an updated version. I mean, I guess if I really wanted to like ask them for another for another favor, I could be like, can you please reread just the first chapter, like, and see if it's stronger? But then again, like, they might say, I think it's stronger, or I think maybe not. And like, it's still the final decision about what your chapters are gonna look like. It's still yours, right? And so it's gonna be my work and my decision about which chapter is actually stronger. So I will have a second round of readers. So hopefully these people are gonna give me feedback too about whether or not they were interested in the beginning of the story. My battery died, so I have to record it a little bit later. But basically what I'm trying to say here is that this is a learning process for me, getting feedback from beta readers and or critique partners, and figuring out which of it is useful for you, which of it is not really, where you're gonna listen to people, where you are gonna just stick by whatever you've got. It's a process, right? And I think throughout the career, writers figure out how to make it most efficient, and the number of beta readers, because you don't want 20 different opinions, because then you're going to be really confused. You do want to ask for feedback from people who you trust. And also when it comes to purely beta readers who are not writers, you want opinion from people who read in the genre and love the genre and understand the genre. So for example, for me, sometimes when I'm given feedback on my writers' friends' works, I find it difficult because I personally do not read this genre, or do not really read this subgenre, kind of like maybe this style doesn't quite work for me. But I still try to find some elements I can comment on, even if overall this is not the kind of book I personally would pick at a store, or at the library. But really, ideally, you want to find people who love this genre and are really familiar with the way it's supposed to feel, and can really objectively, especially if they read a lot, like can really objectively assess if your story works and what parts of it doesn't work, etc. It's also not helpful if the person is like, oh, I loved it. Great. But I cannot do anything about it, right? So you definitely want some critical feedback, but maybe not too much, so that you're not overwhelmed. And you do need to learn to listen to yourself as well, and know yourself and your voice as an author. And oftentimes when I give my work to somebody to read, they say it's voicey. They say like the voice is very strong. The problem with that is that the voice can be strong in a way that other people are not gonna vibe with. So you need to find, if your voice is strong, you need to find the audience who loves this kind of voice. But at the same time, it's your voice as an author. It's your particular, kind of writing, like the things that make you tick, the sentences that make you smile, And if that brings you joy as a reader and as a writer, you have to keep it, because that's the heart of writing. Like that's the art of writing. That's what makes it alive for you and for the reader. So getting rid of that because somebody didn't like it, obviously you shouldn't, right? So you need to really listen to yourself as well as to those people and like have this like perfect balance. Like, okay, I know who I am as a writer, I know what I'm trying to do here, but I'm also open to feedback, and if things don't work, they don't work and I have to rework them. So it's just a very interesting learning process, and it's new for me and I am enjoying going through it. So yeah, this is probably going to be it for today. I feel like I rambled so much today. I started this video, I thought I would give you like just like a little short little information session on like how I'm doing this stuff, but then I get so excited about the process and about everything that I start yammering, so sorry about that. But anyways, next time I'll be in touch. It's probably gonna be after that conference because I want to focus all of me on getting this book ready and getting my pitch ready for the conference and just like getting in the right frame of mind for it. And then after it, I'll come back and update you guys on how it went, how it felt to sit in front of an agent and pitch my book to them, and all of that jazz. So anyways, thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye!